Remember that video that I did a couple weeks ago where I showed off our entire apartment and just all of our stuff? Well, now I'm kind of wishing that I had waited to shoot this video because Kristen and I just got this basketball hoop from Chinatown Market, and it's like my favorite thing in our apartment now. Okay, so I want to start this video by saying this is in no way some kind of flex and like, oh, I shoot with two A7iii's at the same time. This is more kind of me showing you something really unique to me. I'm kind of a crazy person who likes to run with a gimbal in one hand and an A7iii with the tighter lens and a camera strap around my neck. It's a super wacky setup, but if you are on more of a budget and that's not something that you're able to do, I actually saw something really cool on Instagram that's really similar to this idea where someone was shooting handheld with an A7iii and they had a little Osmo Pocket mounted on the A7iii. So that's kind of an interesting idea, and it gets into the real point of this is sequencing. So I would describe most of my work as run and gun in that I don't have much time to shoot. Things usually happen once. Sometimes I'm shooting by myself, sometimes I'm shooting with a second shooter, but really the point is things are moving fast. I have to capture a lot. So in that process, I think it's really hard to kind of evaluate yourself and see what you can do better. But shooting weddings for over a year, I've kind of realized that this is something that's unique to me and something that I think is really important. What I've seen with other people's wedding films, especially those who just start out, is that they kind of just shoot slow motion the whole day. And so their whole edit is just kind of all those moments of the day just kind of slowed down and put on a timeline, which I mean is great, and it's a style that a lot of people like and it's pretty easy to sell. But something that I've developed for my own films is really focusing on getting the cleanest image that I possibly can and putting together these sequences. So for example, when a groom is getting ready at a wedding, you're usually having him stand in front of a window. You're usually in a pretty small room. There might be other groomsmen. There might be a photographer shooting over your shoulder. So I started having one camera with my Sigma 24mm on a gimbal, and then another camera with a 50mm and a camera strap, and I will shoot like this with both cameras. I know it sounds crazy, but it really works, and it really creates these dynamic sequences. And the effect is only compounded when you have a second shooter and you can get that third angle. So at that point, you can really start creating these unique moments and capture all of these more artistic, advanced things. Another big thing for me when I'm thinking about this is I've shot a lot of weddings and I'm like, shot too much slow motion. I shoot on the Sony A7iii and there's no option for 4K 60, so you have to either choose 4K or slow motion. So if I'm doing this kind of setup, I don't really have to choose. I can either be shooting 4K on both, or I can do 4K on the gimbal and slow motion on the tighter handheld shot. I really like that setup. But the point being is I'm never gonna be hitting myself when I come back in post and think like, wow, I didn't really need to slow down the shot, and now it's like half the quality in 1080. I can't punch in, I can't color grade this how I want. So I wanna always have as much flexibility as possible. Another benefit that I've found is when you're working with clients, especially in weddings, you kind of have to say like, hey, can you do that again? I want to get a different shot of that. Like, hey, kiss again, I'm gonna get a close-up angle. This kind of expedites the process, and you know, there are so many times where I'm doing a wedding and maybe the photographer is more in charge of the day. I'm shooting over the photographer's shoulder. I may only have like 1 minute with the couple, so I wanna capture as much as possible without asking them, hey, do this one more time, do this one more time. It makes the process enjoyable for the client, and in doing that, I think that you're giving them a very positive perception for when they're viewing your film. They're gonna know how much fun it was working with you and how easy it was, how they weren't having to act things out and do things multiple times. those perceptions are going to be in play subconsciously in the mind when they're watching your film, and I think it can only help you, in addition to you have great shots. So I think it's important to have diversity in shots. That's focal length, that's camera movement, that's lighting. So in doing this, I'm forcing myself not to go too heavy on the gimbal and not to go too heavy handheld. Something that's been a big pet peeve of mine, and I know it's been a big pet peeve of other filmmakers, is other people's reliance on the gimbal. People just float around all day when they're shooting, and I understand it's a run and gun situation. You don't always have time to switch things up, and you don't always have time to really be intentional and think about what you're doing. But in a way, this kind of forces me to give myself different looks for different shots. Sometimes I've got a handheld look, sometimes I've got this smooth, buttery gimbal movement, but in the end, we've got diversity in camera movement, and then we've also got diversity in focal lengths and perspectives. The difference between a 24mm and a 50mm is pretty significant, and I think that it's really nice to be able to real time, boom, 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 and take advantage of both perspectives. So I really think this has taken specifically my wedding filmmaking to the next level. There are a lot of moments that I really don't think I would have captured the same way otherwise, and emotions that I've been really able to key into and punch into. And the last maybe 3 or 4 wedding films, I've been doing this process, and I've been loving it. So this is mostly when I'm doing prep, and I think a lot of the time that prep part is kind of stressful because you're waiting for this stage time where you can have the bride staging her makeup or the groom staging, getting ready, all this stuff. You may only have a few minutes and you're going back and forth constantly, so there's a lot going on. And this is where I really like to have both, just to keep myself from getting too stressed, to know I have lots of shots to cut to. I'm constantly in my mind thinking about the edit, and it really almost puts my mind at ease knowing I have a second angle almost all the time. I also use this in the stage stuff with the bride and groom, all of these cinematic shots. You've got the gimbal movement, you got the close-ups, and a lot of those times I've got Kristen helping me, so I'm telling Kristen, hey, get on the 85mm and maybe punch in, get as close as you can. So I'm getting these wide angles and intermediate shots, sometimes going close, and then Kristen's getting those extreme close-ups, hands and faces, and I think that system has just worked so great for me. Okay, so here's my specific setup. I have 2 A7 III's. I run one on the DJI Ronin S gimbal. I love that thing. It is a little heavy. I might recommend doing a Weeble Lab or a Zhiyun V2 or something like that. That's a little bit more lightweight, but I do run it with the Sigma 24mm f1.4 and a cage. So my camera setup is a little bit heavy, and I like that the Ronin S gives me that latitude to have a heavier camera setup. The other camera I'm running with a Peak Design camera strap, so I can just leave that thing hanging if I'm not using it. So I can be going two-hand with the gimbal and then boom, quickly pick up the other camera and have a second angle whenever I want. So I don't necessarily have to always be shooting with both. So one of the cool things about shooting with these two cameras is I have these zoom adapters, so I can quickly transition the polarized ND from one camera to another. A lot of the time I'll be shooting regular speed on the gimbal, so I have the polarizer here, and I'll be shooting slow motion on this camera so it doesn't need the ND. And action. Now zoom, zoom, and then let me get it like a little bit closer up even. Then do the zoom again. Okay, we've talked a while about how much I love doing this, but I do have to talk about a few of the downsides And the main one you may have been wondering is, yes, you do have to rely on autofocus a lot. A lot of you might not be comfortable doing that. I know there are a lot of manual focused purists out there, but I'm somebody who thinks that most of the time autofocus can do a better job than I would. The one thing that is really frustrating with this though is you can get hung out to dry if one of your cameras is focusing on a face in the background because you've got both hands occupied. So you can drop one camera and, adjust the focus on the gimbal, which is nice, but you're kind of out of luck on the handheld unless you fold out the tripod, set the camera down, and do your focus that way. So that is definitely a downside, and I know that might turn a lot of you off from this process, but for me, in experience, in practical use, I think that the autofocus has worked pretty well, and it's a trade-off that I'm willing to make. I know maybe I'll miss a shot here or there, but the extra shots that I'm getting more than make up for it. The other big one that I'm sure a lot of you have talked about is how much weight you're putting on your arms for a considerable amount of time. I'm a pretty thin dude. I've got pretty small arms, so that Ronin S arm gets some severe kind of just tennis elbow feeling in these tendons in my arm. It kind of hurts. It kind of gets really tiring after a while. So, that's just something to keep in mind. Again, it's just worth it to me, especially if I'm running and gunning. And the final thing that I think is just kind of a downside to this is you might have less of a focus on your composition. I know you can only look at one screen at a time, so, most of the time you're kind of guessing with one. There have been a few times where I've got burned by that, but overall, I think that in general, you get a feel for it, and a lot of the time, I'll have one camera on top, and I can easily look back and forth between the two of them, so that really works for me. And like I said, I know this isn't for everyone, so I want you to comment below and just let me know if you think that I'm absolutely out of my mind, or if you think that this is a good idea that you might be willing to try. So anyways, that is it. My name is Austin Black, and I just want to remind you that all of the links on my kit page are affiliated links, and I receive a small commission from those items, and I really appreciate everyone who checks out the YouTube channel, checks out the kit page. I appreciate everyone's support. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.